Listen, I've seen a lot of supposedly elite warriors in my time, but none quite like Zektar of the Vorthak Empire. Picture this: 7 feet of crystalline exoskeleton, 4 arms that could crush steel, and eyes that glowed with the cold fire of 1,000 conquered worlds. The guy looked like he'd been designed by someone who thought regular nightmares weren't scary enough. Zektar had arrived on Earth with all the confidence of an apex predator entering a petting zoo. His mission briefing had been laughably simple, according to the Galactic Council's intelligence reports. Humans were soft. Humans were weak. Humans would probably apologize while being vaporized. The Council had been very specific about this last part, apparently having observed some particularly polite British documentaries. Primitive mammals, Zektar muttered to himself as his cloaked ship settled behind what humans charmingly called the Applied Sciences Building at Riverside University. His translator implant helpfully informed him that applied sciences roughly translated to, "We're not really sure what we're doing, but we're doing it with enthusiasm." The Vorthak hunter had spent 3 solar cycles studying human behavior patterns, learning their weaknesses, preparing for the systematic elimination of their species' greatest minds. According to his research, the most dangerous humans were concentrated in locations called universities, where they supposedly developed their most devastating weapons. What Zektar found instead was Professor Marcus Webb. Now, Marcus was exactly the kind of human the Galactic Council should have been worried about, if they'd bothered to read past the first page of their own intelligence reports. He was a xenobiology professor, with the kind of brilliant scattered mind that could theorize about alien life forms with startling accuracy while simultaneously forgetting where he'd put his coffee cup, which, for the record, was usually in his hand. The deadly confrontation began at precisely 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, because apparently even interstellar assassination attempts have to work around academic scheduling. Zektar had tracked Marcus to his laboratory, a cluttered space that looked like a library had exploded inside a chemistry set. The alien warrior activated his plasma claws, prepared his intimidation stance, and burst through the reinforced door with a roar that should have sent his target fleeing in terror. Marcus looked up from his microscope, blinked twice, and said, "Oh my God, are you carbon-based or silicon-based? Please tell me you're silicon-based, because my entire dissertation defense depends on proving that crystalline life forms can achieve consciousness. And Dr. Hendricks said it was theoretically impossible, but here you are and you're obviously sentient and this is going to revolutionize everything." Zektar's intimidation roar sort of petered out into confused silence. "I'm sorry," the alien said, his translator struggling with the concept of academic excitement. "Did you just ask about my molecular composition?" "Well, yes," Marcus said, already reaching for a notebook. "I mean, assuming you're not here to kill me or anything ridiculous like that. You are the most extraordinary xenobiological specimen I've ever encountered. 4 arms, crystalline structure, bioluminescent optical organs. Do you mind if I ask how your respiratory system works? Because the atmospheric composition here should be completely incompatible with crystalline-based metabolism. Unless you've got some kind of adaptive filtering system, which would be absolutely fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint." Zektar stared at this human who was supposed to cower before his might, watching as Marcus actually started taking notes, real notes, with little diagrams and everything. "You're not afraid?" Zektar asked, his plasma claws retracting automatically. It's hard to maintain a threatening posture when your target is sketching your bone structure with obvious delight. "Afraid? Of you? Why would I be afraid of the most significant scientific discovery in human history?" Marcus looked genuinely confused by the question. "Unless... Oh no. Are you here on some kind of diplomatic mission? Because I should probably call the dean. Or maybe the State Department, or possibly the pizza place, because this is definitely going to be a long night and I haven't eaten since... When did I last eat?" And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the most feared hunter in the Vorthak Empire found himself standing in a cluttered university lab, being asked about his dietary requirements by a human who had apparently forgotten that first contact protocols don't usually involve offering snacks to potentially hostile alien visitors. Zektar would later realize this was the exact moment his mission started going sideways, though at the time he was mostly trying to figure out why his prey was more interested in his biochemistry than his reputation for interstellar violence. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and it was about to get a lot funnier. You know what they don't teach you in elite alien assassin school? How to handle a target who keeps asking if you'd like a second cup of coffee while he explains the peer review process. Zektar had been prepared for screaming, running, maybe some light begging, He had not been prepared for Marcus Webb's genuine enthusiasm about grant applications. So the fascinating thing about academic hierarchies, Marcus was saying, completely oblivious to the fact that Zektar had spent the last 20 minutes trying to figure out how to restart his assassination attempt, is that they're essentially tribal power structures disguised as intellectual merit systems. Which, now that I think about it, probably exists in your culture too, right? I mean, you've obviously got some kind of military ranking system, judging by those insignias on your... Is that armor, or is it part of your exoskeleton? Zektar looked down at his ceremonial battle gear, which had taken 3 days to properly consecrate in the blood of his enemies. It's both, actually. Brilliant. Integrated biotechnology. Do you molt, or is it more of a continuous regeneration system? Marcus was back to taking notes, his pen moving at a speed that suggested dangerous levels of caffeine consumption. Because if it's molting, the implications for materials science alone... This was not going according to plan. Zektar had tried 3 different hunting strategies so far. First, the classic lurk menacingly in shadows approach, which had resulted in Marcus asking if he needed better lighting for his work. Then, he'd attempted the demonstrate superior technology gambit by showing off his plasma weapons, which had led to a 40-minute discussion about energy efficiency and environmental applications. His third strategy, intimidating psychological warfare, had backfired spectacularly when he'd mentioned his mission to eliminate threats to galactic security. Marcus had immediately launched into an excited explanation of how his research on theoretical combat applications could actually help predict and prevent interspecies conflicts. You see, Marcus continued, pulling out what appeared to be a 300-page manuscript, I've been working on this paper about xenobiological combat applications. Purely theoretical, of course, since we've never encountered actual alien life forms. Well, until now. The basic premise is that most species would develop combat techniques based on their evolutionary advantages, environmental pressures, and resource availability. Zektar found himself actually listening. The human's theories were surprisingly accurate. Disturbingly accurate, in fact. Take your species, for example, Marcus said, gesturing at Zektar with his coffee mug. 4 arms suggest either an arboreal evolution or possibly aquatic origins, given the symmetrical development. The crystalline structure implies high-pressure environmental adaptation, probably a world with intense gravitational or atmospheric pressure. Your optical system shows adaptation for multiple light spectrums, so either a world with complex stellar conditions or extensive underground development. Every single observation was correct. Zektar's home world was indeed a high-pressure, underground cave system orbiting a binary star. His people had evolved from crystalline formations that had somehow achieved consciousness after millions of years of gravitational stress and stellar radiation. How did you... Zektar started, then caught himself. This was intel gathering. Obviously, the human was more dangerous than the Council had realized. Oh, just basic xenobiological extrapolation, Marcus said cheerfully. It's all theoretical, of course. Well, was theoretical. This is so much better than theory. Would you mind if I asked about your social structure? Because I've got this hypothesis about crystalline-based societies and hierarchical command systems that I've been dying to test. And that's how Zektar found himself explaining Vorthak military organization, while Marcus scribbled notes like his life depended on it. Which technically it did, though not for the reasons either of them were thinking about. Fascinating, Marcus muttered. So it's merit-based, but merit is determined by combat effectiveness, resource acquisition, and strategic thinking. That's actually remarkably similar to human academic tenure systems, except we use publications instead of conquered worlds. You have tenure wars? Zektar asked, momentarily distracted from his assassination duties. Oh, you have no idea, Marcus laughed. Academic politics make galactic conquest look like a friendly neighborhood barbecue. At least when you vaporize someone, they stay vaporized. In academia, your enemies just become peer reviewers. Zektar was beginning to understand why the Galactic Council considered humans dangerous. They were completely insane. Who else would create a social system based on ritualized intellectual combat? It was like watching a civilization that had weaponized curiosity. Actually, Marcus continued, your timing is perfect. I'm supposed to present this research at the departmental meeting next week, but I've been struggling with the practical applications section. Having an actual alien warrior here to consult with, this could revolutionize everything we know about interspecies relations. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zektar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Genuine interest. not in completing his mission, but in understanding how this bizarre human mind worked. "You would want my help?" he asked, "even though I'm supposed to be your enemy." Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "Enemy? Why would you be my enemy? You're the most significant research opportunity in human history. Besides, anyone interested in discussing xenobiological theory for 2 hours straight is obviously a fellow academic at heart. Coffee?" And somehow, inexplicably, Zextar found himself saying yes. What followed was the most surreal week in the history of interstellar warfare. Zextar, who had conquered 12 star systems and personally eliminated 17 enemy commanders, found himself sitting in a university library at 2 a.m., helping Marcus format citations for his research paper. No, Marcus was saying, pointing at Zextar's laptop screen. "APA format requires the author's last name first, then initials, so it should be Zextar Cathon et al. Not Cathon Zextar and his battle brothers." "But that's how we list military achievements in the Vorthak Empire," Zextar protested. "Combat records are always hierarchical." "I'm sure they are, but the Journal of Theoretical Xenobiology has very specific formatting requirements. Trust me, I've been rejected 3 times because I used the wrong font size." Zextar stared at this human who spoke of publication rejection with the same resigned tone he'd heard from veteran warriors discussing battle scars. "They rejected your research because of font size?" "Oh, that's nothing," Marcus laughed. "Jenny got her paper rejected because she used Oxford commas inconsistently. Tell him about the time Professor Davidson got blacklisted for citing Wikipedia." Jenny Park had joined their unlikely study group on day 3, when she'd found them debating the theoretical applications of plasma weaponry in Marcus's office. She was Marcus's research assistant, a graduate student with the kind of cheerful pragmatism that could organize a zombie apocalypse survival plan, while simultaneously ordering pizza for the group. "Wait," Jenny had said, looking between Marcus and the 7-foot crystalline alien warrior. "Is anyone going to address the fact that we're having coffee with what appears to be an extraterrestrial being, or are we just going to pretend this is normal Tuesday behavior?" "Jenny, meet Zextar," Marcus had said casually. "Zextar, this is Jenny. She's helping me with the statistical analysis section." "Hello," Zextar had replied, slightly confused by human social protocols. "Hi," Jenny had said, then sat down and opened her laptop. "Okay, so about those confidence intervals." And that was it. No screaming, no running to alert the authorities, no existential crisis about humanity's place in the universe. Just a grad student treating first contact like another item on her research checklist. It was, Zextar was beginning to realize, very typically human. The study sessions had evolved into something that might charitably be called academic bonding. Zextar learned about human concepts like procrastination, which he found deeply disturbing yet oddly relatable. Vorthak warriors also had a tendency to delay difficult tasks, though they called it strategic timing and pretended it was intentional. He'd discovered the sacred ritual of pizza ordering, which involved complex negotiations about toppings that reminded him of interplanetary treaty discussions. Jenny always wanted vegetarian, Marcus insisted on pepperoni, and Zextar had developed an unexpected fondness for mushrooms, which apparently was the most alien thing about him, according to Jenny's notes. "So let me understand this," Zextar said during one late-night session. "Your entire academic career depends on the opinions of anonymous reviewers who may or may not have actually read your work?" "Pretty much," Marcus replied, highlighting another section of their collaborative paper. "It's like trial by combat, except instead of swords we use footnotes." "That's horrifying," Zextar said admiringly. "It's more brutal than our military promotion system." "Oh, you haven't heard about tenure review yet," Jenny laughed. "That's when they really bring out the big guns." Zextar had been particularly fascinated by the concept of academic deadlines, which seemed to function as a form of psychological warfare that humans inflicted upon themselves. He watched in amazement as both Marcus and Jenny could transform from relaxed, coffee-drinking researchers into caffeine-powered productivity machines as submission dates approached. "This is remarkable," he'd told them during one particularly intense all-nighter. "Your species has developed a system that artificially creates combat stress to enhance performance. It's like voluntary battle conditioning." "You know what," Jenny had said, looking up from her 4th energy drink. "When you put it like that, it sounds way cooler than it feels." But it was during these sessions that Zextar began to question everything he'd been told about human civilization. The Galactic Council had described Earth as a primitive world, populated by violent, irrational creatures. What he found instead were people who stayed up until dawn arguing about proper methodology, who shared their food with strangers, and who got genuinely excited about discovering new ideas. Marcus and Jenny didn't treat him like a monster or a curiosity. They treated him like a colleague. When he mentioned that his military training included tactical analysis, Jenny immediately asked if he could help with their statistical modeling. When he explained Vorthak information warfare techniques, Marcus got excited about applications to academic research strategies. "You know," Marcus said one evening, "the Galactic Council's assessment of human capabilities seems remarkably incomplete." Zektar looked up from the research notes he'd been reviewing. "What do you mean?" "Well, according to what you've told us, they classified us as technologically primitive and socially disorganized. But they missed some pretty important factors." "Such as?" Jenny grinned. "Such as the fact that humans will work 18-hour days for years on projects that might never succeed just because we're curious about something. Such as our tendency to collaborate with anyone who shares our interests, regardless of species, apparently. Such as our ability to survive on nothing but caffeine and spite during finals week." "Spite?" Zektar asked. "Pure stubbornness," Marcus explained. "The refusal to give up, even when logic suggests we should. It's not rational, but it's remarkably effective." Zektar thought about this. His own people valued logic, efficiency, and strategic thinking. But he'd never encountered anything quite like human academic determination. These creatures would pursue knowledge even when it was inconvenient, impractical, or potentially dangerous. They seemed to treat learning like a form of recreational combat. It was, he was beginning to realize, absolutely terrifying from a strategic standpoint. And somehow, sitting in that cluttered university library, surrounded by empty coffee cups and stacks of research papers, helping two humans argue about proper citation formatting, Zektar found himself wondering if the Galactic Council had gotten everything completely wrong about Earth. The thought should have been troubling. Instead, it was strangely liberating. "Hey Zektar," Jenny said, interrupting his philosophical crisis, "do you know anything about grant applications? Because Marcus just remembered he has a funding deadline next week." Marcus looked up with the expression of a man who'd just realized he'd forgotten to defuse a bomb. "Oh no. Oh no, no, no." And just like that, Zektar found himself more invested in human bureaucracy than in completing his assassination mission. The universe, it seemed, had an even stranger sense of humor than he'd originally thought. If there's one thing that transcends species barriers, it's the universal horror of performance reviews. Zektar discovered this when his communicator started buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from General Claxton, his superior officer, who was apparently having what humans would call a moment. "Status report, Hunter Zektar," came the first message, delivered in the traditional Vorthak tone of barely contained military fury. "Your mission timeline shows significant delays. Explain." Zektar stared at the communicator while Marcus and Jenny continued their heated debate about whether their paper needed more graphs or fewer acronyms. He realized he hadn't filed a proper mission report in 6 days, which was roughly equivalent to going AWOL in the middle of a battle. Guys," Zektar said, interrupting their argument about data visualization, "I think I'm about to get fired." "Fired?" Marcus looked up from his laptop. "From what?" "The assassination mission," Zektar replied absently, already composing his response. "I'm supposed to eliminate Earth's greatest scientific minds, remember?" Jenny and Marcus exchanged a look. "Right," Jenny said slowly. "The assassination thing. That's still happening?" "Well, technically yes," Zektar said, typing rapidly. "But I keep getting distracted by your methodology section. Do you think General Claxton would be interested in our findings about human academic resilience patterns?" "Probably not," Marcus said diplomatically. Zektar's second message arrived 3 hours later, and this one carried the digital equivalent of a very large stick. "Hunter Zektar, your reports are overdue. Submit immediate tactical assessment of human defensive capabilities and estimated termination timeline." "Okay," Zektar said, staring at the message. "This is a problem." "What kind of problem?" Jenny asked, looking up from her statistics homework. "The kind where my commanding officer wants a tactical assessment of how to kill you all. And instead, I have 17 pages of notes about your coffee consumption patterns and a detailed analysis of why peer review is more psychologically damaging than traditional torture methods." Marcus brightened. "That sounds like great material for a supplementary paper." "Marcus," Jenny said patiently, "focus. Zektar, what happens if you don't file the report?" "Court-martial, followed by execution, followed by being fed to the sacred battle worms." Zektar replied matter-of-factly. Standard procedure. Battle worms? Very large, and hungry, and they have opinions about military efficiency. Jenny pulled up a fresh document on her computer. Okay, new plan. We help you write a report that technically fulfills your requirements without actually giving them information they can use to hurt anyone. Is that possible? Jenny once wrote a grant proposal that requested funding for innovative approaches to traditional research methodologies and got $50,000 to study whether coffee shops or libraries are better for productivity, Marcus said admiringly. If anyone can turn bureaucratic language into protective camouflage, it's her. What followed was the most surreal homework session in galactic history. Jenny, who had apparently minored in creative writing before discovering her talent for statistical manipulation, began crafting a military report that was technically accurate, but practically useless. Okay, she said, reading from her draft. How about this? Human defensive capabilities demonstrate remarkable adaptability under pressure, with particular strength in collaborative problem-solving and resource optimization during extended conflict scenarios. That's just describing study groups during finals week, Marcus pointed out. Exactly, but it sounds appropriately military-ish, right, Zektar? Zektar was discovering that humans had a remarkable talent for making the mundane sound threatening, and the threatening sound mundane. Under Jenny's guidance, his report began to describe Earth's academic institutions as strategic knowledge fortification centers and coffee shops as civilian morale maintenance facilities. What about this part? Marcus asked, pointing to a section about human cooperation patterns. Should we mention that Jenny organized a 12-person study group that functioned like a military unit during comprehensive exams? Target species demonstrates sophisticated tactical coordination in high-stress environments, Jenny translated. Observed units maintain operational effectiveness through coordinated resource sharing and strategic task distribution. You make it sound like we're planning an invasion, Marcus laughed. We kind of are, Jenny replied. An invasion of ignorance, with properly formatted citations. Zektar sent the report, hoping that General Claxton would be too busy with actual military operations to read between the lines. This hope lasted approximately 37 minutes. Hunter Zektar, came the next message, and this time the digital fury was accompanied by what appeared to be confused bureaucratic panic. Your report raises significant concerns about human capabilities. Request immediate clarification. Are you suggesting these creatures possess advanced psychological warfare training? Well, no, Zektar muttered. What's wrong? Marcus asked. He wants clarification about your psychological warfare training. Jenny looked up from her laptop. You mean graduate school? Don't answer that, Marcus said quickly. If he finds out about qualifying exams, thesis defenses, and job market applications, he'll classify us as a Class A threat to galactic mental health. The messages kept coming. General Claxton wanted detailed intelligence about human resource optimization strategies, meal planning, endurance conditioning protocols, all-nighters, and collective resistance techniques, study groups complaining about professors. This is getting out of hand, Zektar said, staring at his 15th urgent communication of the day. He's asking about your ability to function on minimal sleep while maintaining cognitive performance. That's just being a graduate student, Jenny said. That's what I'm afraid of, Zektar replied. The final message arrived just as Marcus was explaining the concept of thesis-advisor relationships to their increasingly worried alien friend. Hunter Zektar, General Claxton's message read. Based on your intelligence reports, I am personally traveling to Earth to assess this situation. Prepare for command inspection in 72 hours. Do not engage targets until my arrival. Zektar stared at the message, then looked at Marcus and Jenny, who were both watching him with the kind of concerned expressions usually reserved for friends who are about to do something monumentally stupid. So, Jenny said carefully, I'm guessing this is bad news. The worst, Zektar confirmed. My commanding officer is coming here, and he's expecting to find dangerous, militaristic humans with advanced psychological warfare capabilities. Instead of graduate students with coffee addictions and anxiety disorders, Marcus added. Exactly. They sat in contemplative silence for a moment, surrounded by their research materials and empty pizza boxes. Finally, Jenny spoke up. Well, look on the bright side. At least we've got 72 hours to prepare a really impressive PowerPoint presentation. Zektar wasn't sure whether to laugh or start planning his own funeral arrangements. With humans, he was beginning to realize those might be the same thing. General Claxton arrived on Earth with all the subtlety of a natural disaster having a bad day. His ship, which was roughly the size of a city block and decorated with what appeared to be the skulls of defeated enemies, landed directly on the university's main quad at precisely 3 p.m. on a Friday. This was unfortunate timing as it was the middle of finals week, and disturbing stressed college students during their ritualistic pre-exam panic was roughly equivalent to poking a hibernating bear with a very sharp stick. "Sir," Zektar said into his communicator, watching through the library window as students began emerging from buildings to stare at the massive alien warship, perhaps a more discreet approach would have been advisable. "Discretion is for the weak," General Claxton's voice boomed back. "I am here to assess these dangerous humans you have described. Prepare them for interrogation." Marcus and Jenny flanked Zektar at the window, both holding coffee cups and wearing the kind of expressions people get when their day suddenly becomes much more complicated than anticipated. "So that's your boss," Jenny said, remarkably calm for someone whose planet was currently being invaded. "That's him," Zektar confirmed. "General Claxton, conqueror of the Nebula Wars, destroyer of the Crystal Fleet, winner of the Galactic Strategic Excellence Award 3 years running." "He sounds impressive," Marcus said. "Does he have any experience with academic bureaucracy?" "Why would he need—" "Oh, no," Zektar realized what Marcus was thinking. "No, absolutely not. We are not subjecting a decorated military commander to university administrative procedures." "Why not?" Jenny asked, already pulling up the campus website. "Look, if he wants to formally interrogate students, he'll need to file a request with the dean's office. That requires Form 27B, which needs to be submitted at least 2 weeks in advance, along with a detailed explanation of research methodology and IRB approval for human subjects interaction." "IRB approval?" Zektar asked weakly. "Institutional Review Board," Marcus explained. "They oversee ethical research involving human subjects. Very thorough, very slow, very fond of paperwork." "You want to defeat a galactic military commander with filing requirements?" "Zektar," Jenny said seriously, "you've seen what academic bureaucracy did to us. Do you really think someone unfamiliar with the system stands a chance?" 20 minutes later, General Claxton stood in the dean's outer office, his crystalline battle armor reflecting fluorescent lighting in ways that made him look like a very angry disco ball. He was facing off against Mrs. Patterson, the dean's administrative assistant, a woman who had been gatekeeping access to university officials since before some of the professors were born. "I require immediate audience with your academic command structure," the general announced in his most intimidating military tone. Mrs. Patterson, who had spent 30 years dealing with entitled faculty members, desperate graduate students, and confused freshmen, was completely unimpressed. "Do you have an appointment?" "I am General Claxton of the Vorthek Empire. I do not make appointments." "Well, you do now," Mrs. Patterson replied pleasantly, sliding a clipboard across her desk. "Fill out the visitor request form and I can schedule you for next Thursday. The dean has a 15-minute opening between faculty senate and the budget meeting." "Next Thursday?" The general's voice carried the kind of outrage usually reserved for mutinous subordinates. "Unless it's an emergency," Mrs. Patterson said. "Emergency requests require additional documentation and approval from the provost's office." From their hiding spot behind a decorative plant, Zektar, Marcus, and Jenny watched as one of the galaxy's most feared military leaders encountered his first taste of university administration. "This is painful to watch," Zektar whispered. "This is beautiful to watch," Jenny corrected. "Look, he's actually filling out the form." General Claxton was indeed filling out the visitor request form, though his handwriting suggested he was imagining various forms of violence against whoever had designed the document. His frustration only increased when Mrs. Patterson informed him that his request to interrogate human specimens would need to be reclassified as research involving human subjects and routed through the RB for ethical review. "Ethical review?" the general sputtered. "Standard procedure," Mrs. Patterson explained. "We take the welfare of our students very seriously. You'll need to submit a detailed research proposal, including your methodology, risk assessment, and data protection protocols. The committee meets twice a month." "How long does this process take?" "Oh, usually just 4 to 6 months, depending on the complexity of your proposal and whether you need to make revisions." Huh. The general's roar of frustration rattled the windows and sent several undergraduates diving for cover behind vending machines. "Is there perhaps a more immediate alternative?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled in the way that suggested internal screaming. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully, "you could attend our public information sessions. We have one starting in the library right now, actually. Some of our graduate students are presenting their research on interspecies cooperation and conflict resolution. Interspecies cooperation? General Claxton's eyes began glowing with interest. These humans have developed strategic intelligence on interspecies relations? Oh yes, very advanced work. Marcus and Jenny are presenting. Lovely students, very thorough researchers. And that's how the most feared military commander in 3-star systems found himself sitting in a university library, surrounded by stressed undergraduates cramming for finals, watching a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Building Bridges Across the Galaxy, a Collaborative Approach to Interspecies Understanding." Jenny had outdone herself with the presentation. She'd managed to transform their study sessions with Zektar into a comprehensive analysis of successful human-alien cooperation, complete with graphs showing improved research outcomes and statistical models predicting long-term diplomatic benefits. As you can see from slide 17, Marcus was saying, pointing to a cheerfully colored chart, collaborative research partnerships demonstrate significant advantages over traditional adversarial approaches. Our case study shows measurable improvements in problem-solving efficiency, resource utilization, and overall satisfaction ratings. General Claxton sat in stunned silence, watching data that proved everything the Galactic Council believed about humans was not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. These weren't primitive warriors or dangerous psychopaths. These were researchers who had figured out how to turn potential enemies into study partners. The implications for galactic relations are significant, Jenny continued. Rather than viewing interspecies contact as zero-sum competition, humans appear naturally inclined toward collaborative frameworks that benefit all parties involved. Questions? Marcus asked brightly. General Claxton raised one of his 4 arms. Are you saying that humans prefer cooperation to conquest? Oh, absolutely, Jenny replied. Conquest is expensive and time-consuming. Cooperation gets you better results with less effort. Plus, you learn more interesting things when you're working with people, instead of against them. The general turned to look at Zektar, who was sitting in the back row, trying to become invisible. Hunter Zektar, is this assessment accurate? Zektar realized this was the moment everything would either fall apart spectacularly, or somehow work out in the most improbable way possible. He looked at Marcus and Jenny, who had spent the last week treating him like a friend rather than a monster. He thought about late-night study sessions, shared pizza, and the way they genuinely cared about helping him understand their world. Sir, he said, standing up, I believe the humans have weaponized friendship, and I think it's the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. General Claxton stared at him. Explain. In me, sir. In less than a week, they convinced me that helping them with their research was more important than completing my mission. They did this through strategic applications of coffee, collaborative problem-solving, and something they call peer support. I believe they could do the same to our entire military structure. The library was completely silent. Even the stressed undergraduates had stopped pretending to study. Finally, General Claxton spoke. You're saying these humans are too dangerous to conquer because they would make us not want to conquer them? Yes, sir. The general considered this for a long moment. Then he began laughing, a sound like grinding crystal that somehow managed to convey both amusement and resignation. Hunter Zektar, he said, you have discovered something that will either get us both court-martialed or promoted to the Council of Strategic Planning, possibly both. And that's when Jenny raised her hand. Excuse me, but would you be interested in co-authoring a paper on this? Because I think we're looking at groundbreaking research on interspecies diplomatic methodology, and having a military perspective would really strengthen our findings. General Claxton looked at her, then at Marcus, then at Zektar, then back at the PowerPoint presentation that had apparently just revolutionized galactic politics. Do you have coffee? He asked finally. Always, Marcus replied. Then yes, the general said. I believe I would. 6 months later, Zektar stood in front of a panel of Galactic Council members, sweating through his ceremonial academic robes, and wondering if it was too late to go back to simple interstellar warfare. At least when people shot at him with plasma cannons, he knew what to expect. Thesis defense committees, he had discovered, were far more terrifying and significantly less predictable. So, candidate Zektar, said Councillor Vexnith, shuffling through what appeared to be a 300-page dissertation, your central argument is that humans represent not a military threat, but rather a diplomatic opportunity of unprecedented proportions? That's correct, Councillor, Zetar replied, trying to keep his voice steady. My research demonstrates that human academic culture contains highly effective conflict resolution methodologies that could revolutionize interspecies relations across the galaxy. In the audience, Marcus and Jenny sat in the front row, both wearing their finest "we're definitely not plotting anything" expressions. Marcus was holding a banner that read, "Go Team Science," while Jenny had prepared what she called a statistical analysis of Zektar's awesomeness, as a backup presentation, just in case things went sideways. General Claxton, who had surprised everyone by becoming deeply invested in academic procedure, was serving as Zektar's thesis advisor. He'd adapted to university life with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to military campaigns, though his office hours were notoriously intense. Students had learned that constructive feedback from the general usually involved detailed strategic analyses of their argumentative weaknesses. "And you base this conclusion on extensive field research?" Counselor Zixneth asked, not looking up from her notes. 18 months of embedded observation, Zektar confirmed, including direct participation in human academic culture, collaborative research projects, and what they call the job market, which I can confirm is more psychologically challenging than any military training I've previously encountered. This was absolutely true. Zektar's first academic job interview had been a harrowing experience, involving a presentation to skeptical faculty members, a dinner where he'd had to make small talk about research interests, and something called a teaching demonstration that had somehow been more stressful than actual combat. "The methodology section of your dissertation," Counselor Vexneth continued, describes something called participant observation, where you lived among the humans for extended periods. "Yes, Counselor. I shared residential space with several graduate students, participated in their social rituals, and contributed to their research productivity." What he didn't mention was that sharing residential space had involved moving into Marcus and Jenny's ridiculously overcrowded apartment, where he'd learned to navigate the complex politics of shared refrigerator space and developed strong opinions about whose turn it was to do dishes. The social rituals had included everything from pizza nights to something called Netflix and existential crisis sessions, where they'd watch movies and discuss the meaninglessness of academic life. "Your findings suggest that human study groups function as highly effective diplomatic units?" Counselor Zixneth asked. "Exactly," Zektar said, warming to his favorite topic. "Human study groups demonstrate remarkable capacity for integrating diverse perspectives, resolving conflicts through collaborative problem-solving, and maintaining group cohesion under extreme stress. I believe these same methodologies could be applied to interspecies diplomatic negotiations." "And you've tested this theory?" "Extensively," General Claxton interjected, standing up from his seat. "With the Council's permission, I'd like to present our practical application data." What followed was the most surreal diplomatic presentation in galactic history. General Claxton, Marcus, and Jenny had collaborated on a comprehensive analysis of what they called the Coffee Shop Accords, a revolutionary approach to interspecies negotiation based on human academic collaboration principles. "As you can see from our pilot program results," Jenny said, clicking through slides with the confidence of someone who had just spent 6 months turning alien military officers into statistical converts. "Informal collaborative environments produce significantly higher rates of successful agreement than traditional formal negotiation structures." "Coffee shops?" Counselor Vexneth asked incredulously. "Coffee shops," Marcus confirmed. "Neutral territory, shared resources, ambient noise that prevents eavesdropping, and readily available caffeine to maintain cognitive function during extended discussions. We've successfully mediated 17 minor territorial disputes using these protocols. The Andromedans and the Centaurians have agreed to joint archaeological expeditions," General Claxton added proudly. "The Regalians are collaborating on stellar cartography projects, and the Taucidians have established a cultural exchange program with the Vegan Confederation." "As because of coffee shops?" Counselor Zixneth still sounded skeptical. "All because of collaborative methodology," Zektar corrected. "The coffee shops are just the optimal environment for human-style diplomatic interaction. Informal, non-hierarchical, focused on shared objectives rather than competitive positioning." The council members exchanged glances that suggested they were having the kind of private communication that high-level officials have when reality becomes too strange to process normally. "Candidate Zektar," Counselor Vexneth said finally, "your research suggests that the most effective way to handle potentially dangerous species is to invite them to collaborate on academic projects?" "Not just academic projects," Zektar replied. "Any collaborative endeavor that emphasizes shared goals over competitive outcomes. Humans have demonstrated that cooperation produces better results than conflict in virtually every measurable category. And this approach has been successfully tested across multiple species?" 17 species and counting, Jenny interjected helpfully. We're planning to expand the pilot program to include artistic collaborations, scientific research partnerships, and something we're calling interspecies book clubs. Book clubs? Shared analysis of literature promotes cultural understanding and develops empathetic perspective-taking, Marcus explained. Plus, arguments about character motivation are excellent practice for diplomatic disagreement management. There was a long pause while the council members processed this information. Finally, Councillor Vexneath spoke. Candidate Zektar, in your professional opinion, what would happen if we attempted to conquer humanity using traditional military approaches? Zektar thought about Marcus's enthusiasm for alien technology, Jenny's talent for turning enemies into research partners, and the general human tendency to respond to challenges by forming study groups and staying up all night until they figured out solutions. Counselor, he said seriously, I believe they would invite us for coffee, ask if we needed help with our logistics planning, and somehow convince us that collaborative galactic governance would produce better results than imperial conquest. And they would be right. That's terrifying, Councillor Zixneth muttered. That's humans, Zektar agreed cheerfully. The council voted unanimously to accept Zektar's dissertation and establish the Galactic Department of Collaborative Relations, with Zektar as its first director. Marcus got tenure based partly on his groundbreaking work in applied xenodiplomacy. Jenny became the first human to receive the Galactic Academic Achievement Award, though she insisted on sharing it with her statistical analysis software. And General Clox Thon discovered that running a university department was remarkably similar to military command, except that instead of conquering enemies, you helped students conquer their academic goals, which, he had to admit, was significantly more satisfying than traditional warfare. The victory party was held in Marcus's apartment because some traditions are too important to abandon. As Zektar looked around at the crowd of humans, aliens, and former military officers all arguing cheerfully about research methodology while sharing pizza, he realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their strategic thinking. It was their remarkable ability to turn every situation into an opportunity to make friends. And that, he thought, as Jenny launched into an explanation of why their next paper should definitely include more graphs, was probably the most dangerous thing in the universe. In the best possible way.